Buongiorno, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. Your resident Ned Spotos at your service. Well, what I wanted to talk about today, there are two gods and there are two Satans. God damn it. Wow. Maybe that was, yeah. Well, that could be interpreted either way. I mean, person who didn't like what I was saying, who's a Christian, would say that, two different Christians, that one likes what I'm gonna talk about, the other one doesn't like what I'm gonna talk about. The one that doesn't like what I'm gonna talk about, son of a bitch, I'm doing all kinds of goofy shit right here. The person who doesn't like what I was gonna talk about would say, "Oh, that God made you slip that because that's a sign." Or, in the person who does like, or the Christian who tells me that they do like what they're hearing, is that, "Oh, Satan's trying to mess you up." So, but that kind of garners to what I'm going to talk about here. See, I have happy accidents. I had a visual aid that allowed me to actually expand on what I was going to say, and I'm not going to put that there. I will set it right here. It's easier to get at. No, what I mean is, and I can approach this many different ways. There's many different ways to consider it. But I say there's two gods and there are two Satans. You have your bad version of God, in which God is, where people hang signs up, or who protest and say God hates fags and God's gonna do this to you and that bullshit. And also in lieu of people who are conservative Christians who don't really exercise God's version of goodwill, that that the poor deserves to be poor and suffer because they brought it upon themselves. Stuff like that. That's a bad version of God. And then there's the bad version of Satan, in which, of course, the actual Satan, where people are killing each other, murdering, what have you. Your regular type Satan, And then you have your good version of Satan and your good version of God. Your good version of God is the person who is benevolent, who gives, is loving, and all that stuff. And then your good version of Satan is the one who defies the bad version of God. So in actuality, the good version of Satan and the good version of God, the good version of Satan and the good version of God is actually it's trying to think here. The good version of Satan is actually the good version of God in disguise. And the bad version of God is the bad version of Satan in disguise. So basically, that's what it is. You have Satan. The good version of Satan is where people who, like I was talking about, that the conservative Christians who use God in a way to further their own means and actually do horrible things, but they think it's righteous, and it's not. And ultimately, that's what Satanists actually, your core non-theistic Satanists, or even some of your theistic Satanists, they don't actually hurt anybody, but like according to Anton LaVey, these, you look at, I've said it, talked about in another video, that you look at the satanic, I think it's like 10 Commandments, or something like that, and even the satanic sins. Well, they're a little bit different, but if you look at them, if you didn't know any different, you'd swear it was some kind of scriptural, Holy Bible scriptural verses. Thou shalt not hurt little children, and a lot of different other things that are common sense type of philosophies. And I was watching Black Sabbath's Paranoid album. I forget, it's like a series of legendary albums, and they talk about it and talk about their days and their philosophies and what they were thinking when they were writing the songs and stuff like that. And basically, their song War Pigs kind of takes on that exposure of the bad version of God, in which the bad version of, where the hierarchy of our government, going and trying to basically carry out their McCarthyist vision of securing and trying to contain communism in the world. And even my dad who's a Vietnam vet, and he can't, and he really can't stand when people talk down about the military, but he even said himself that, it didn't make any sense how they were fighting that war over there. It didn't make any sense how that they were just fighting, but they were never moving in to really take anything over, And I don't know if it's just because it was guerrilla warfare, because, you didn't know who the Viet Cong was, because it was all spread throughout. It wasn't really the Viet Cong were not really a centralized. There was a version of the VC that had their soldiers, but it was kind of a parasitic, kind of almost like a Borg-like thing that they would assimilate, their citizens, and then they would fight for them and stuff like that. But really, it just didn't make any sense how that was all going down. And basically, that's what the song War Pigs is about. It's about the senseless violence of war, in which you're not accomplishing anything. You're just fighting, and you're not doing anything. And that's kind of what he was showing, that actually the bad version of Satan was actually disguised as the good version of God, and therefore it was the bad version of God. And basically the song exposes the actual satanic aura of what it was all about, even though it was in disguise. And that's what the bad version of God is. It's the actual bad version of Satan, but it's that in disguise. And that's the problem that ultimately is kind of what's been going on. There's so many different people, a lot of Christians I know are so caught up with what they think God's all about, and all they're doing is just listening to religious propaganda pundits, telling them things that, that this is, it's, supposed to be righteous in this bullshit, but it's not, because they're keeping the real information from them. I mean, it's almost akin to how the way that during the Dark Ages, how they kept people stupid, or people were stupid, I guess, because they didn't have access to information, and basically, like the Roman Catholic Church, controlled the information and made up a lot of their own thing, and that's why for so long that they, why Galileo was gonna, or I think, I can't remember if Galileo was actually killed because of his scientific studies. So that's one example of how, where people who are actually exercising the good version of God, but you have to become and basically take on the good version of Satan in order to fight the bad version of God. You have to disguise yourself. You have to disguise yourself as the real God to fight the disguised version of Satan. But yeah, so I mean, that was that's why, in the song War Pigs, Satan laughing spreads his wings, because he was able to get away with it because he disguised himself, and people had their heads too far up their asses to even know the difference. So I kind of saw, if you look at the anti-war movement of the 60s, that was basically the good version. That was basically the bad version, or the good version of Satan. And you were not able, even it's very, very touchy. It's very, very elusive. But that's, so like at any time, it's like I'm listening to heavy metal, and heavy metal is basically the good, it's basically the good version of Satan, if you will. And because it's exposing, it preaches and exposes the bad version of God, and that's what I'm vying for, because it's like I can never really understand, exactly why people get so upset about it, because it really means nothing, but I guess it means something good, because it's actually taking on that bloated version of God that really is not God at all.